role uh, is singular at your institution, right? There is no one else that occupies that role, and so sometimes it can be somewhat isolating. Um, and I'll let John share more in just a moment. But I'm Brandon Smith. I'm a senior assistant, no associate, excuse me. I don't even know my own title today. Senior associate vice president here at the Gardner Institute. I've been here about 6 years. Before that, I worked in academic affairs in Western North Carolina at Brevard College, and before that, I was at Midwestern State University on the faculty at both institutions. Um, and we'll do formal intros in just a minute, but I will say that this work with the chief academic officers is work, but it is such. I just ended my last meeting with those folks saying it's like an oasis. There are days when this work, you are trekking through the desert to your points. And some days that's the job. Like to Daniela's point, like you signed up for a really hard job, like change hearts, minds, society through education, prepare students for the world that we don't even fully understand or know for the future, right? Like arm them for that. And that's hard work. That is this, and it's meaningful work. And to be in the room with chief academic officers to get to on a monthly basis, investigate how we do that effectively is a gift. And so this work for me, I know I'm preaching a bit right now, but I just came out of a, a truly inspiring meeting. And so I just want to share a little taste of that with you. It's very practical, but I hope if you choose to join us and join this true community, like I said, the group that just met spanned 5 years worth of this work coming from vastly different institutions, um, and yet had so much common experience. And we used every bit of our 90 minutes. So again, apologies for starting a bit late, as we were in one of our classic CAO innovation conversations. But I just wanted to set the stage a bit. John's going to do a better job of setting the stage, letting you know more about the organization. So I'll start sharing my screen and pass the mic to our co-founder, Dr. John Gardner, and just one of my absolute favorite human beings. So John, the floor is yours, pal.
Wow, how can I live up to that introduction with the time allotted? And even if I had far more time, I don't know. Well, I'm pleased to be here this afternoon, and I'm going to practice truth in, I don't want to say advertising, but truth in the invitation that we're extending to you to consider coming a part of this process and see where it will take you. Brandon has identified me correctly. I am the co-founder, along with my wife, Dr. Betsy Barefoot, and I'm the executive chair of the organization, which evokes the language that Jeff Bezos has used for Amazon. We're certainly not Amazon, but the organization and the board I lead, and we have a CEO whom you'll meet if you join the process, Drew Koch, who reports to me and the board. And we have been at this work for 27 years, and we are still very much a learning organization, and we have a set of values and beliefs. And I want to share one of those values that I think it's important for you to hear us say. That is, of all the roles that we have that create formal positions in the academy, we think the role of the chief academic officer is the most important. And that's why the three of us who are here, and a fourth who's not here this afternoon, Dr. Felita Williams, who's has in her history, she's also been a chief academic officer as part of the University System of Georgia. We believe in the importance of this role. And we also believe that now, 2026, almost 27, more than ever, higher education, if we're going to save itself, has got to be more able to practice innovation because we believe in the mantra, and we have got a slide that'll say this in a minute, that the way we are organizing, this is what we're calling the central law of improvement here, the way we are organizing our campuses and our work as academics is perfectly designed to get the results we're getting right now. Now, let me repeat that. The way each of you in your current positions are organized as an institution of higher learning, you are perfectly organized to get the results you're getting right now. So if you like those results overwhelmingly and you don't want to modify them in any way, you should not do this cohort, okay? Because we're going to be focusing you in with every way we know how to think about examining what my colleague Brandon has taught me to think of as, quote, problems of practice, and to decide what you in your role as chief academic officer can do to address those problems of practice. And as Vicki would remind us, and she may well when she speaks here, is that all these problems of practice are interconnected in a stunning fashion. And so when you start to fix one, you inevitably have to go to others. But in this process, we invite you to, in the spirit of the session we just did with a group of our former chief academic officers, we were asking them what it meant to be authentic. Let me repeat that. What does it mean to be authentic in your role as a chief academic officer? That's a guiding principle for us. Question. We believe that often the questions are more important than the answers. And this work, if you get in it, is going to be very, very interactive. We are not going to lecture to you. And we want you to know that we believe in the intersection of your roles as chief academic officers and you as human beings and the other roles that you may occupy as husband, wife, lover, father, parent, citizen, community member. All of those influence how you do this CAO role. And we are very concerned about the whole person that you bring into this, which is another way of saying that some of what we are going to do, we hope will improve the mental health of all of you, and that certainly will help us maintain ours as facilitators. Sounds kind of selfish, but we are doing this voluntarily, and we do it for these kinds of reasons. All right, Brandon, I was just going to say that the Gardner Institute, we're 27 years old. We are a proudly nonprofit organization. We have a mission to serve all students, to help them fulfill their potential. We believe that this work is in the national interest. I'm a veteran of the Armed Forces of the United States. I view this as a very patriotic duty, and I'm glad to be here with you this afternoon. Look forward to the comments I assume you will soon make. Vicki, let me pass this to you. Or Brandon, is that the order we're going in? Help me, Brandon.
Perfect. Yeah. Since Felita is not with us, it will
Yeah.
be Dr. McGillen.
Okay, that's what I thought. I'm so pleased to welcome her and introduce her. Vicki and I share in common that we are both recovering former chief academic officers, and she brings an experience from the liberal arts private sector that I've never had as a chief academic officer, and lots of other things about her. And I tell you, I meet people around the country who've been through this process, and they always end up quoting, as Vicki told us. So you'll get a sample right now. Okay.
Oh dear. Now I feel truly set up. Thank you, John. Thank you,
Yeah.
Brandon. And good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'll be very brief, as John has indicated. I've served as a chief academic officer at two private liberal arts institutions, one in Oregon and one in Ohio. After having come up through the ranks the old-fashioned way, I have had to live with the issue of the complexities of higher education, but my disciplinary training was as a clinical psychologist, which I do humorously and not so humorously state that, particularly with my specialization in family therapy, that my training to deal with large, complex, dysfunctional systems was, in fact, perfect preparation for my role as a chief academic officer. With all of the multiple talents that we have amongst our facilitators in the community, the area that I bring probably most firmly comes from my background in psychology, looking at both the cognitive psychology and the neuropsychology of innovation, creativity, resistance, and change. So that our hope is that you will have the opportunity in this community to be able to explore the roles of mindsets as well as the roles of community in facilitating change and understanding the complexity of change at your institutions. So Brandon, I think, or you take it away, or
I'll be very brief because I've already done my sort of introduction, but I was on faculty at a couple of institutions, ran a department. I am my initial disciplinary background is actually theater, so I was an actor, playwright, director. Um, and as I moved into academic administration, I realized that I might need just some additional training. So I went back for another terminal degree, focused on the use of improvement science in higher education. And so that's a lot of what I bring to the space, but you'll frequently hear me refer to Aristotle, in addition to things like curricular analytics and problems of practice. So John brought this up, and rather than speak at you about this idea, I wonder if you wouldn't mind unmuting and respond to this notion. We pulled it from a book called The Improvement Guide, but this notion goes back to folks like Ed Deming and others that when you get an output, whatever that output is, your system was perfectly designed to produce it, especially if it's a highly reliable output. Say if your retention or graduation rates are within a standard deviation, right? Like if it's been living there for a while, like that means your system is really good at producing that outcome. So I'm curious how this notion resonates, because I know for me, when I was in my second round of graduate school, uh, it hit me in the gut because it hit me in the gut. So I'm just going to open to any responses.
We're struggling with this as a campus right now. We're trying to make very important changes from the president down. Our president has been here for about a year, and so he is trying to be very transparent with the faculty and with the staff. And um, one of those messages that we are trying to get out there is that we have got to improve. And so, like you said, retention rates, graduation rates, all of those things are not budging. And so anything we can do to start moving the needle to where we want to be, that's really my goal and the goal of our entire upper leadership. And so just really motivating people to start making those changes is something that I'm really, really interested in learning how to do.
Thanks, Beth. That's really helpful context, and also it sometimes it's hard to talk about those things. So thank you for unmuting.
This quote
Anybody?
reminds me of the quote often misattributed to Einstein about being crazy is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Um, of course, our systems are so complex with so many variables, it's hard to say which variable is going to have the major impact on our outcomes. And change is hard. So if we can only make little changes, what are those changes going to be to have the best possible impact?
Michael, I feel like you've been reading some of the improvement science textbooks. That's it. Now you're spot on. And we ascribe to a number of different philosophies associated with seeing the system so that we can make strategic decisions about which changes to pursue. But we're also firm believers that to get big changes, you have to have the aggregation of marginal gains, right? So we've got to get a few percent here and a few it's very unlikely that one action is going to make huge differences within your system, to your point, because of how many variables are at play to get to an outcome like graduation rates. Like if you were to try to enumerate those for a given student, um, that what how many would it even be? And so then trying to develop that theory of change for your institution that says we believe these things are going to really drive student success. That's one of the opportunities I think of this work. So I'll open the floor to any other comments on our good friend Langley and Associates.
I was going to say that I'm having a hard time with faculty when we talk about these things and they seem to, maybe blame is not the best word, but to point out to the student and to say, well, you know, that is the variable, is the student, and it's almost like they are very discouraged at the moment. I think, you know, like after COVID and then now with AI, and is just feeling that the students are not coming as prepared as they were used to, and that variable, it almost like it's very defeatist, because it's like it doesn't matter what we do, we can change all of these things, but if this, you know, we're getting these students who are not prepared or who are not interested in learning, or, you know, all of these things, then it's really hard to move the needle. So it is, they're already starting from that point, that and so it's, you know, the motivation is, it just doesn't seem to be there to and so that when we say the system, they're thinking more about that not really external, but that, you know, the student, and that the student is changing every year. Every year we're getting a different crop, and then how do we continue to move the needle? Because even if we make those differences, that sometimes are long term to implement. By the time we implement them, then that crop of students is yet different, and all of that. And so it's been difficult to motivate them to do the work that I think needs to be done independent of the students and with the students. So sorry, it's a lot. It's a lot.
No, it's so in line with a lot of the work that we do. So this notion of deficit ideology, that's what the literature refers to, you know, that notion that faculty might see students coming in with deficits as opposed to an asset-based lens. Because if the institution says, like, these are our students, it is up to us to figure out how our systems support those students. And to your point, they have changed and they will change. And so how do we create systems that adapt to those changes and develop what we call leading measures, right? Because if the only measure of success is that graduation rate, well, then we got a problem. This notion of a critical period comes from what is it? It's the nexus of leadership, and it's Goldstein, Hazy, Lichtenstein. But they're basically, it's very similar to Bowman and Deal's idea that a systems model with delay, like when we push something off for a long period of time, all of a sudden we'll feel urgency, right? So when our systems are not producing the outcomes we want, these are some of the hallmarks that you may need to innovate, right? Sense of urgency, well-crafted plans don't work, performance declines. And when those things happen, we have to recognize, to Michael's point, that it's multivariate, right? Each of these little nodes on this graph could represent a different aspect of your institutional system. And we'll actually work with you to visualize some of your institutional systems associated with a problem of practice that you want to solve for. So like Beth mentioned, perhaps retention or graduation rates. If that's maybe right now how the institution perceives the problem, but we're going to work through trying to understand what are the root causes of that and how might we innovate, like what's really within our control to innovate around, and how could we change our systems. So these gents, Innovation in the Nexus of Leadership, that's the name of the book. But innovation is the outcome of a system-wide set of processes and interactions. If we just make a change in one spot, there may be unintended consequences for others. And we see this over and over again, right? We got to have the right folks in the room. We've got to have a team of folks working on this. So I think this is still me, just for one or two more slides, and then I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Vicky. But, you know, this is a space for new CAOs, experienced CAOs. One of our, dear friend, you know, he shares almost every time he talks about this, that he'd been a CAO for many years before he joined this group, and it helped him sort of redevelop his love for the role. And I think that, you know, for that person, you know, he came in with a very different perspective than when he walked out. And if you want to talk to any of our graduates, alums, we'd be happy to connect you with folks. We got a whole slew of folks that we're very closely connected with. Sometimes it's newly appointed CAOs, sometimes it's CAOs who are in charge of one school or a system. So it's very adaptable, and we've got folks on our team who have experience at a lot of different types of institutions. These are some of the things that we try to do, and I've talked around these, so I'll be brief so we can have more time for conversation. But we approach innovation through this idea of systems analysis, right? And innovation comes into being when there is a great need. And so if you're able to identify great needs, you can use improvement science methods, which is a big part of what I get to share as part of this group, to innovate and to develop theories of change. But we also hope that you cultivate some creativity along the way and that you join a safe place to share and talk. Like the conversation that we just had, that is really the inspiration for the books that are on these different topics. Those come from something we do at the end of every one of our meetings, which is a CAO innovation time, which Vicky will talk more about in a minute. But it's really a space to bring your challenges, bring your celebrations, and talk about where your institution needs innovation. So while each month there's a bit of a lesson, and you all present on where you are in your own process, there's also, we hope, a true space for collaboration. So Vicky's going to talk more about how we try to cultivate that.
Thank you, Brandon. In this slide, I'll be sharing a little bit of the secret sauce about what goes on in the innovation community. We have monthly meetings, and I'll be talking a little bit more about those meetings in my next slide, so that there truly is the opportunity over time for you to come to know one another, to build a sense of trust and community, because we feel that the understanding of community and the use of the community is incredibly important. And that includes that sacrosanct last half hour where the recording gets turned off and anyone can bring anything to the table. That is a current dilemma that they are dealing with on their campus, because as John referenced early on, and as Brandon referenced, you are singular in your role. You are the one of you at your institution. You have perhaps one boss in your chancellor or your president, but there is no one else necessarily in your role. So who do you get to turn to when you have questions about what are some ideas? What's worked for anyone? How can I handle this sort of a dilemma? And that CAO innovation time has ranged from the highly singular, I have this kind of a particular faculty personnel issue that is hot and breaking and sticky and nasty, and I really need help with, to broad issues about dealing with working with your board of trustees, et cetera, and appropriate approaches for use of that. So anyone can bring anything to that last half hour of the time, and it becomes a real sacrosanct part of our time as community. So building that sense of community, building a true community practice where you share with one another, learning the tools of improvement science, the methodologies. We will introduce you to a number of techniques and approaches that we will in turn expect you, encourage you, and urge you to turn around and apply immediately back on your campuses. Come back, share the results about how it worked or didn't work, and refine, develop, and go back and continue the process as you work on implementing a particular innovation project throughout the year. We'll also share with you a number of tools and approaches for how to develop personally, how to develop an innovative mindset, but also approaches that you can share with your teams so that you can encourage their development of an innovative mindset, as well as approaches of dealing with resistance to change and how to address resistance to change in systems. I think we've hopefully have made clear the point. We truly honor the complexity of the system of higher education and the complexity of each of our individual campuses, and being able to have the tools to understand the complexity of your systems, yourself within that system, and your team members within that system will be important as you're trying to craft a particular innovation project. Ultimately, it is that space to work collaboratively on solving whatever the big problem is that you will ultimately decide that you're going to want to work on throughout the year. In terms of our engagement plan, the next slide, here we have, as I mentioned, the monthly meetings, September through June. We have scheduled the first virtual meeting for Thursday, September 29th, 6:30 to 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time. We will confirm future monthly meeting times with you all, but knowing how crazy schedules get right away, we know we needed to get this first one set and on the books as early as possible. We also have two in-person retreats that take place, one in the month of October and one back in June at the end of the year, where you'll spend 2 days, 2 full days together as a community, working together, working collaboratively, eating, socializing, but also learning and exploring with one another in an absolutely beautiful setting here on the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. As you begin to initially dive into building an innovation plan for a problem of practice, and ultimately at the end of the year, we'll have the opportunity to share what you have come up with, what you have done, and what you're proposing to do as you move forward. And again, because we need to nail down reservation spaces, et cetera, we've already selected the block of time, October 28th through 30th, for the first in-person retreat on the Blue Ridge. We know that this can be a problem. We do urge participants, however possible, come and join us for as much of it as possible. Worst case scenario, we will Zoom you in for as much of the retreat as possible, but it is an important opportunity for bonding and connecting and really growing the community. Katie.
Thank you, Vicki. I'll just share a little bit about the application process and the fees associated with the community. So the application process, we use that word very loosely. Really, it is a brief application where we ask you what you hope to get out of the community, because we want to make sure that what you're looking for aligns with the experience. And the fees for the experience are $9,250 plus the cost for your travel to the two in-person meetings. And that fee can be split into two fiscal years, if that makes it easier. We know a lot of institutions are strapped right now, so we will work with you to make sure that we can help you get into this. And we also do offer a discount to CAOs from under-resourced and underrepresented institutions. And if you feel like your institution fits that category, just email that info@gardnerinstitute.org. That comes to me, and I will tell you what the process is for that.
Thanks so much. So we're putting this back up on the screen primarily so that you can grab a screenshot, grab an email address. If this seems like something you're interested in and you've got questions or you'd like to be connected with some alums, we'd be happy to do that. Again, we've had a broad range of folks who've done this work. So, we won't, if you tell us kind of institutionally who's similar or however you want to be connected, we'd be happy to do that. And if now isn't the right time, but you're interested in knowing more about this, is one of the beauties of being part of a nonprofit is that we will do whatever we can to support the mission and support institutions. So let us know, how we can be of service, essentially, how we can help. It is worth also bringing up, that if the CAO work may not fit into your time, but you're interested in doing some work with us or learning more about the organization, we've got the symposium, our annual symposium, which is our big meeting on transforming transforming the post-secondary experience. And that's October 13th through the 15th. There's some pre-con meetings even before that. So, let us know if you've got questions on any of these fronts. And what we'd really like to do is now open the floor to conversations about any responses you have to this, any clarity we can add to sort of the opportunity and just sort of hear from you all.
Brandon, I'm going to jump in and just offer something that I frequently say at this particular point in time for chief academic officers from, shall we say, institutions who have learned to work more with less for quite a few years, which I think hits an awful lot of our institutions. Uh, when you think about the idea of I have X number of dollars in my budget to address all professional development for everyone in my sector of the institution, how can I justify spending this amount of money on myself? The one piece that I want to share with you is that we encourage you to think about this is something that you're doing not just for yourself, for your own professional development, but in fact, it is something that you will be doing for your institution and for your team at your institution, that you will be taking these skills, techniques, and approaches back and working with teams of individuals on your campuses. So our expectation is think of this as actually an investment in your institution as well as an investment in yourself. If that helps as you think about justifying the expense of this process, but it truly is for the whole institution.
We're open to your reactions too, in addition to any questions you might have or points you've heard reference to, but you'd like us to elaborate on. We want to be as transparent as we can. We're good at that.
I think the more we can learn about the topics covered and maybe even some reviews from past attendance, that would be wonderful. My problem is my big statewide CIO conference, Chief Instructional Officer Conference, is that same exact week in October. So that would be a hard one for me, but it would be something I'd love to look at for the future, perhaps. But yeah, the more we can learn about what we're going to be taking out of it, the better.
How would you like us to provide that for you, Michael?
I was thinking maybe an agenda of past sessions.
Mhm.
We have
Reviews certainly are great from past attendance.
I'm pulling up a document right now.
I belong to a small private institution, Allied Health Sciences. We have been in existence for 105 years, and I've been the vice president of the college for about 12 years. So my challenge is, I just learned yesterday that our college is being bought by a private capital entity. So we are in the process of a transition. So I don't know which way this is going to move, but I would be really interested in investing myself because I'm a lifelong learner and I've been in higher ed for the last 35 years.
Did I hear you? I may have been imagining. Did you say you were being acquired by a Catholic institution?
Yeah, no, a private equity institution.
Oh, private equity. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Oh my goodness. They love to skim the profit right off the top.
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We have had participants in the community who I'm thinking of one from our very first cohort whose institution has just been acquired by another university and is going through a lot of the challenges associated with being gobbled up by someone bigger than yourself.
Right.
And
Big
all
fish
that
eating small
entails.
fish.
All that entails in terms of curriculum and personnel and
Correct.
mission, et cetera. It is certainly part of the reality of the American landscape of higher education today.
Michael, to your point about sort of seeing the syllabus, I'll share my screen briefly. This is something We actually normally provide a very detailed syllabus, and sometimes that can be cognitive overload. And so we've been working on how do we deliver on each of these aspects, on the community piece, on neurocognition and mindset, on improvement science, and then also on the systemic complexity and how you mobilize your team. And so we're still working on this document. We were working on it Monday. You can see there are comments still in it. But a big part of it, I can speak primarily about the improvement science track on this, but we follow the methodology that might feel familiar if you've seen anything on Lean or Six Sigma, or if you're familiar with Ed Deming's work. We spend a lot of time on the front, another Einstein quote, and I'm not even sure it really was him, but if he had a big problem and he had a day to figure it out, he'd spend 23 hours on the problem and then the last hour on the solution. We spend a lot of time trying to help folks see the system and understand that, say something like retention or graduation rates, that's not your problem. That's the output. The problem is are the aspects of the system. And so we work through both a mixed method approach, both quantitative and qualitative, understanding what produces those undesired outcomes through interacting with multiple constituents on your campus, to then build a visual map of what's producing those outcomes, and then build a new visual map of how you make changes. And we pull from not just improvement science literature, but also other literature. This Water of Systems Change is a great article that we incorporate early on. And so that's really the how of some of the improvement. The fishbone diagram is the mapping of the current state. The driver diagram is the mapping of your future state. And then we work with you on a plan, do, study, act cycle, which is essentially how you mobilize your action plan, and turn that into something that your entire team can be a part of, where we show that actions, great or small, should have measures to show that they are pushing towards that larger theory of change. To Vicky can speak more on some of the aspects of the neurocognition and the mindset. But I would argue that, as important as I believe improvement science is, our CEOs tell us that one of the pieces that has helped them more than anything is that work on neurocognition that Vicky leads.
Thank you, Brandon. I think they go hand in hand, and we're actually exploring ways that we can do more and more of these in an integrated manner. But it's also about understanding yourself, understanding why it is your brains operate in the ways that are open for change, and why it is that and how it is that they shut down. Understanding the complexity of the systems and where you can find those levers for change that you can operate within the system, as well as how you can build collaborative teams to be able to enable systems change to take place. Because as fabulous as you are individually, one of the things that I say right from the front, that one of my lessons that I had to learn as a chief academic officer, and I put it on a sticky on my mirror, was it's the people, stupid. And that was my reminder every morning that it was no longer my job to be the smartest person in the room. It was my job. It was my job to make sure that everyone else had the opportunity to become the smartest person in the room, working together collaboratively to be able to make the change happen. And if I lost sight of that, I was losing sight of where the institution needed to go and what needed to happen. So it's moving through some mindset issues, mindset literature and exercises, some self-discovery exercises that will take you through, that you'll share with one another, that will also hopefully build the connections that you'll feel with one another as you learn more about each other. And then how you can use those and design those for implementing them actually with your institution. But ultimately, you will also be identifying a problem of practice that you are wanting to work on that will become your focus. And it may change, and it often does change in the first couple of months until it settles down into, yes, this is indeed the problem I want to work on. that you'll have the opportunity to be vetting that, developing it, working on it month over month with feedback from your colleagues and from us, ultimately into a plan, an implementation plan that you can take forward into the next year, hopefully with an operational team on your campus who's help on your campus or set wherever it is you end up.
Yeah.
As you move forward, taking this forward. And we have had individuals who have had, shall we say, operational changes in title during the time that they were in the community, and that is also the reality of American higher education today. They still remain part of the community and had the opportunity to shift, if you will, their problem of practice to something new that was more appropriate to where it was that they were taking their talents.
Yes.
We've been sharing here some of what we do, but we would want to just recognize that a lot of what you're going to do is interacting with each other and learning from each other and deciding if and how you want to communicate with each other outside the regular meetings that we have for you, which we would certainly encourage you. We're also going to make you a part of, oh, I guess I don't know what our total is now. We have, I guess, somewhere between 50 and 60 people that have gone through this, and we're going to put you into a group distribution with those so that if you wanted to raise something and ask how people in this larger CAO cohort have dealt with X, we would make it possible for you to communicate with them. We would have at least one, I'm not sure whether we'll do two or not, but we'll have at least one meeting in the year where we're going to invite these veterans to come back and join you if they wish to do so. And for a day and a half here in beautiful Western North Carolina, we don't get large numbers of them, but we get a critical mass of them that come back and want to meet you in person, interact with you, and welcome you to the club and bond together in this affinity of shared interests, which is a powerful thing. So
That's actually, it was one of those retreats that was the source of the book that they're working on, because they came together and said, in some of these innovation conversations, they said, I wish we had had something like that in classic John Gardner fashion. He said, well, why don't you write it? And so that's what we've been working on. But it's pretty fun. And again, we're in 30, 45 minutes, we're trying to cover, the year of engagement. But it's also a group that can be reactive, to John's point. If somebody comes in and there is something that has changed, more than once we've offered an extra session on a topic that relates to legislative change or different things that are just emergent, where people are like, I'm not quite sure how to deal with this. And we've been able to bring in some outside experts or dedicate some additional time. So
let's be explicit about that. Right after the Supreme Court came down on the ruling that eliminated Roe versus Wade, we had one of our members say, oh my gosh, how are we going to deal with this? And so we needed to add something to respond to that very immediate thing. And we don't know what to predict in the next year. I mean, my assumption in terms of external factors, but I would assume that the year after the midterm elections is fair game. What could possibly happen in the last 2 years of the current administration that would affect all of us. But we've been around since 1776. We're resilient. We're going to get through this.
What is the typical size of a cohort to get started with this?
8 to 12 is where we've been landing. We've had 1 or 2 years where we scooch up, but we want you to get to know the people in the space. We don't, as much as possible, we want to try to avoid, breakout sessions where people are not part of the conversation or they miss something. So it's a pretty small group, and it's designed that way intentionally. And we've had, 1 year, I think we had as few as 5 or 6, and
we
that
had 6.
year, they bonded so strongly. It was unbelievable. And so that just sort of, I think, reinforced for us that a small but committed group of people really helps you feel comfortable in the space and have open conversations.
Yeah,
we don't want this to be
really hard to hide in this group. People are going to know you to the extent you want them to know you. But that's not, I don't mean to suggest any pressure on self-disclosure, but this is not a lecture process.
it lets everybody get a chance to be part of the conversation.
And we have found that the mix of institutions is not an issue at all. We have 2-year, 4-year, for-profit, not-for-profit, independent, public systems, entire systems represented. You're all dealing with the same issues around the prime mission of the institution, which is the delivery of a curriculum that will produce the learning outcomes you are seeking in your graduates. Hopefully some of that is somewhere reflected in your institutional mission statement as well.
I'm very explicitly directed to Michael. We heard what you said about the conflict with your state CAO meeting. We may want to look at how your agenda for that literally might overlap with ours and see if there's any reconciliation or anything we can do to help you address that.
Yeah, I'll look it up and send it over to you if you like.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We had a colleague from California who was part of this group last year, and he had a similar situation. Flew in, flew out, and we still were able to have some really great conversations.
He flew in and flew out because he was a witness in a lawsuit against his institution, and it didn't work out at all. They lost, not because he attended, but anyway, we felt very badly for him.
So there you have it. Well, we can stick around if you all have any other questions, but we thank you for spending.
Anything else, folks? It's not speak now for holding your peace. Come on, ask us a tough question. Get us to really.
And again, Michael, you had asked about testimonials. Please, we can give you the names of a number of our graduates at comparable kinds of institutions.
Yep,
Be great.
for sure.
We were visited a couple of weeks ago by one of them who's in the founding cohort, and he came up to meet with a couple of us to try to persuade us to create a summer-like Chautauqua process where we would ask CAOs like you to get literally a sabbatical from your institution for a sufficient amount of time to actually do some reading and homework and writing in it while you're in something like this. Now, that's not what this is that we're planning, but the gentleman that came to meet with us to talk about it he was persuaded that we needed to deepen this. And so we're pondering the advice he gave us.
I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, and then if there are any questions you want to ask that aren't recorded, you can do so.
Thanks, Katie.